Word of the Lord. Reading from Daniel, chapter 5. Many years later, King Belshazzar gave a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver cups that his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. He wanted to drink from them with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. So they brought these gold cups taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. While they drank from them, they praised their idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, they saw the fingers of a human hand writing on the plaster wall of the king's palace near the lampstand. The king himself saw the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale with fright. His knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him. The king shouted for the enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers to be brought before him. He said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever can read this writing and tell me what it means will be dressed in purple robes of royal honor and will have a gold chain placed around his neck. He will become the third highest ruler in all the kingdom." But when all the king's wise men had come in, none of them could read the writing or tell him what it meant. So the king grew even more alarmed, and his face turned pale. His nobles, too, were shaken. But when the queen mother heard what was happening, she hurried to the banquet hall. She said to Belshazzar, "Long live the king! Don't be so pale and frightened. There is a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy gods. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, this man was found to have insight, understanding, and wisdom like that of the gods. Your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, made him chief over all the magicians, enchanters, and astrologers, and the fortune tellers of Babylon. This man, Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar, has exceptional ability, and he's filled with divine knowledge and understanding. He can interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means." So Daniel was brought in before the king. The king asked him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles brought from Judah by my predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar? I have heard that you have the spirit of the gods within you, and you are filled with insight, understanding, and wisdom. My wise men and enchanters have tried to read the words on that wall, and they tell me their meaning, but they cannot do it. I am told that you can give interpretations and solve difficult problems. If you can read these words and tell me their meaning, you will be clothed in purple robes of royal honor, and you will have a gold chain placed around your neck. You will become the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Daniel answered the king, "Keep your gifts, or give them to someone else. But I will tell you what the writing means. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave sovereignty, majesty, glory, and honor to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. He made him so great that people of all races and nations and languages trembled before him in fear. He killed those he wanted to kill, and he spared those he wanted to spare. He honored those he wanted to honor, and disgraced those he wanted to disgrace. But when his heart and mind were puffed up with arrogance, he was brought down from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven from human society. He was given the mind of a wild animal, and he lived among the wild donkeys. He ate grass like a cow, and he was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he learned that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. You are his successor, O Belshazzar, And you knew all this, yet you have not humbled yourself. For you have proudly defiled the King of heaven, and you have had these cups from his temple brought before you. You and your nobles and your wives and concubines have been drinking wine from them, while praising gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stones, gods that neither see nor hear nor know anything at all. But you have not honored the God who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny. So, God has sent this hand to write this message. This is the message that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is what these words mean. Mene means numbered. God has numbered the days of your reign and has brought it to an end. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the balances and have not measured up. Parsin means divided. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then, at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was dressed in purple robes. A gold chain was hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. But that very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. And children, you are dismissed.
Thank you, Maggie. Bye, kids. Nice to see you. I know you want to stay for the sermon, but all right. Many of you probably know that, along with a whole pile of other men from this church and several other churches, we were at a men's retreat out at Holmavatten. Our retreat was kind of headed, organized by our own Kurt Gillia. And because, like many of you, when I grow up, I want to be like Kurt. At the retreat on Saturday night, one of the games we played was this pop quiz. Now, not all answers lined up with what Siri said, but they did cheat. We did cheat. But Kurt's answer to that was, "It's my pop quiz." So whatever answer I say is the right answer. So that's where it goes. Our team lost because of that, but we're not bitter. We're good. We're good. Yeah, we were way down. So I have a pop quiz. There's 4 things. They're lines, famous lines. And we're going to compete to see whether the left side of the congregation, which, man, you need to fill up your ranks over here a little bit, is smarter than the right side of the congregation. Okay? And we'll see. So for each right answer, you get a point. Here is famous line number 1. I'll be back. Call it out if you know what it is. Oh, you even knew the name of the actor, Schwarzenegger, but what's the movie? Terminator. All right, so I'm going to give you 2 points because you knew the actor and you didn't do Siri. No, I see your phone in your hand, but. All right, so here is the next one. Life is like a box of chocolates. You're going to have to get a little faster, Sheena, because not only did you get the movie right, it was Tom Hanks that said that. Number 3, may the force be with you. Star Wars got it, and who said it? Oh, a lot of people said it. Yeah, they all said it to each other. May the force be with you. All right, so, oh boy, this is going to be, well, I'm going to have to give 5 points for this one because you're already up 4-1. So, here's the fourth one. The handwriting is on the wall. Oh, good! Because it's my quiz. I can do whatever I want, right? So that really it wasn't in a movie that I know of. Does anybody know that the handwriting on the wall? Yeah, I don't know. Tom Cruise must have said that somewhere in Mission Impossible. But, Daniel 5. Isn't it interesting? You all knew the line, right? But the idea of, okay, well, where did it come from? These other lines, and there's lots of them. They're just part of literally an international culture. Because think of where all the rest of us come from. And we know these things, that they bring back memories of a funny guy sitting on a park bench, ruminating on the meaning of life, of a young warrior looking for power in an intergalactic struggle. They touch us. Well, we all now know Daniel 5, if we hadn't known it before we walked in, because Maggie just read it for us. I'm guessing most of us knew that story. And what I want us to understand is that this particular chapter touches all of our worlds in an unusually powerful way, close way, because if perchance you are here this morning, and we are ever so glad that you are, but you're still struggling with this God thing, and how does this work, and should he be in your life? This is a chapter that needs to speak directly to your heart and your soul. So I ask you that please listen carefully. For the rest of us, if we have already sensed that we've come to faith and trusting in God through Jesus Christ, here's a chapter that touches us, because as David began the service, if you remember the passage he was reading, it talked about us being ambassadors, that we are representatives, that we need to speak for the gospel. But it's not easy. In talking with my men on Tuesday night, I'm finding that America, Norway, other parts of the world, this whole gospel thing, sharing faith, it's getting pretty tough, isn't it? And yet here's a story where Daniel knew that he had to speak up. He couldn't hold back. How does what he understood about God and how he related to God, how does that help us in this struggle? That's what we're going to talk about this morning. But before we get there, let me give you a little background, because not only has it been several years since I've been in this pulpit, actually, it was only 3 weeks. But it's been a long time since Daniel has been in the throne room. Literally about 30 years since we've heard from him, between chapter 4 and chapter 5. What happened is Nebuchadnezzar passed away. His son became king, but the son didn't like doing king stuff. He didn't like administration. He liked to be a warrior, so he was out with the army. And so his son, Belshazzar, was on the throne. And remember, back in chapters 2 and 3, we talked about the backstabbers? Well, the backstabbers finally got to Belshazzar and convinced them that Daniel had no business in the throne room. Why don't we make him in charge of the mailroom? Send him to the mailroom. And for 30 years, Daniel's been a nobody. That's why when everybody freaked out about the handwriting on the wall, did you notice what verse 7 says, hold on, I'm working this out. It'll come. I'm this good on my computer, too. It's scary. All right, you guys want to take it for me? Thank you. All right. The king shouted for the enchanters, astrologers, and fortune tellers to be brought in. Does that sound familiar at all? Who was always calling for the enchanters and fortune tellers and stuff? Nebuchadnezzar. And how well did they help dear Neb? Not very well. How well did they help in this situation? Not very well. They don't know what the language is, they don't know what the words mean, they can't tell what's going on. And so everybody freaks out, especially Belshazzar. And he has no clue what to do, because the name Daniel was no longer in his memory bank. He doesn't even know him. In fact, did you notice that in the first 10 verses of the chapter, you probably weren't tuning into this, but if you go back and reflect, as Maggie read, the name Daniel never shows up. It doesn't show up until when? Well, apparently there was enough fussing around in the banquet hall that the queen mother, and wherever she was living, heard all of the noise, comes to the banquet hall, makes an assessment, and then gives us verses 11 through 12. There's a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy gods. During Nebuchadnezzar's reign, this man was found to have insight, understanding, wisdom, like that of gods. He can interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel. First time his name comes up. Because he's been relegated to the mailroom. And as Daniel comes in, I'm convinced he knows he's been marginalized. It's been 30 years. That's a long time to sort the mail. And that Belshazzar, man, he's got a reputation. And Daniel knows he's not interested in anything he's going to have to say. However, please listen to me, my brothers and sisters in Christ. Daniel knows that this is somewhat futile, but he's got a job to do, doesn't he? Okay, that was the first thing I want you to know about background. Second is that we actually know the historical context to the day. Do you want to know when this banquet took place? I can tell you. Watch the screen. Herodotus, a Greek historian, tells us that this banquet took place on October 12th, 539 BC. Pretty impressive, huh? But we can know exactly when this date happened. And we also know from Herodotus that the Persian army beat the Babylonian army, defeated them outright, kind of like Waterloo and Napoleon, just destroyed them 3 days earlier on October 9, 539 BC. It happened in Sippar. Now, can anybody even put Babylon on a map? Maybe. Anybody know where Sippar is? Probably not. Doesn't matter. I don't care whether we know where to put it on the map. All I want you to know is that Sippar is about 80 kilometers from Babylon. And to put that into perspective, it's about the same distance as Egersund from Stavanger. You know where Egersund is? Most of you do. Takes about an hour and a half to get there south of Stavanger in a car. Not far. Could you walk it? Long walk, but you could do it. Now, what we don't know is, did Belshazzar and Daniel, did they know that the Babylonian army had been defeated? The text doesn't say. But I find it hard to believe that somebody, some soldier, some messenger, hadn't gone the 80 kilometers to the city to tell them. The army is kaput. The Persians are breathing down our neck. And so what does Belshazzar do? What does he do? He has a banquet. He throws a party. And he's having a grand time. Oh dear. October 9, 3 days later, the Persians are inside the city of Babylon. Want to know how they did it? Babylon was built on the shores of the Euphrates River, and a tributary of the river branched off to the east. No, I always get it mixed up. West. And actually went under the wall of the city, flowed through the city, and it was its main water source. Okay? Xenophon, I think that was, not Herodias. Yeah, it was Xenophon who tells us, another Greek historian, that what the Persians did is they went upriver and they shut off the water and forced it to go out into the main river, which dried up the tributary. And then the army simply marched under the wall. Now you think, how in the world could they do that? Because no one was on the wall. Even a lousy king, if he had known that things were getting dicey with the Persians, would have put somebody to watch, wouldn't you think? They literally just walked into the city. There was no battle. And what happened that night? Belshazzar's dead. And the Babylonian Empire's over. Now I'm going to come back to all those implications in a minute. But that's the situation that we find with Daniel. I mean, not only has Belshazzar been very insensitive and unkind to him, but just a very poor excuse of a king. And he's called to come. And don't you wonder if he's thinking, why bother? This guy is like... And yet you can't refuse a king. And Daniel comes, but I've talked about, he understands several things about God, 3 things specifically. Let me show you the first one. The first one is that God is holy and he will not be mocked. God is holy, he will not be mocked. Okay, so Belshazzar throws a party while the Persians are breathing down their neck. Although not really smart. Anything wrong with throwing a party? I mean, is a party immoral? Is it bad? Is it evil? You can at least move your heads one way or the other. That would be helpful. Okay. Stupid, but not wrong. And mind you, this is more than just a hot dogs and beer bash. This is an ego trip for Belshazzar. He's strutting his stuff, and boasting of his power and authority, and he starts drinking. And once the booze starts flowing, what does he do? He comes up with a brilliant plan. Look at verse 2. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver cups that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. Now, to someone who's not a Jew, what do they care about those cups, right? To someone who's a Jew and doesn't know those cups, what's the significance of using them? It's a desecration. It's sacrilege. Now, what's interesting here? Did Nebuchadnezzar have his faults? Of course he did. Big time. Did he ever desecrate the sacred items from Jerusalem or any other god? Not that we know of. That man knew who to respect and what to respect, even though he had an ego as big as a mountain. But Belshazzar actually goes further than just bringing these cups in. Notice verse 4. While they drank from them, they praised their idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Now, I found it interesting that in Tremper Longman's commentary, these are the words he writes after this passage. Belshazzar spits in God's eye, then goes over to a statue that he himself created and expects that lifeless hunk to protect him from what is to come. As goes the king, so goes the kingdom. Nobody's watching the wall. And we know the rest of the story. Belshazzar spurned the holiness of God, thinking it was his right, his authority to do so. You know, I can't help but think that Babylon, Belshazzar, are somewhat an accurate picture of our current environment, and whether it's in America or Norway or beyond, our society. Because every form of perversion is creeping under the walls. And it's like no one's allowed to do anything about it. Any who try to speak out find themselves castigated by the people around them, find themselves criticized. And some of the reason for that is that by and large people don't like the idea of moral holiness. That just sounds so puritanical, it sounds so judgmental, it restricts personal freedom. And we don't want anybody to tell us what we can and cannot do. What we fail to realize, folks, is that in pretty much all other areas of our life, we recognize that holiness, which is simply purity, dealing with things that are uncontaminated, they make up our lives. And without them, we would not function. Let me give you a couple illustrations. Let's say you get home tonight and something serious happens and you're not feeling very good, and then, you need to get rushed to the hospital. They put you in a bed and the nurse comes in and the nurse says to you, "I'm glad you're here, we're going to take care of you, but we've had some serious budget cuts, and so let's show the next slide, we're going to reuse needles here." You don't mind, do you? Besides, the guy in the bed before you, he was a really good guy, so we're just going to reuse needles. That's kind of gross, huh? Or let's say it's like your anniversary, and you're going out to Egon for a special dinner. But it's Sitnamai, and maybe it's been crazy, and you get to Egon, and the waitress comes to your table and says, "It's been so busy, we're out of bread, but I found this in the back of the kitchen. You don't mind, do you? You're going to eat that?" How is it that we know that we can't put contaminants and stuff into our bodies or we're not going to survive? And yet when it comes to everything spiritual, something within us, just like Babylon, we're unwilling or unable to see that we want a holy God. Because one that is fickle, one that is sometimes good and sometimes not, like ancient gods were. You see, holiness is how life works. It's how eternity works. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. What did Adam and Eve eat? Do you want to help? Help. This is not a pop quiz. What did they eat? Some fruit, something. Most people say it's an apple, I don't know. But a piece of fruit. Is that a big mortal sin? It was a little. And look what it's done to us now. Whew. Daniel realizes, though Belshazzar was a brazen, sacrilegious fool, that wasn't the primary issue. The primary issue is God is holy. And all people need to understand that. If you're here this morning, please understand God is holy, and that's a good thing, but must be treated with reverence. Second thing we need to understand from this passage, that God is always fair, always just, and will do what is right. Now, there are those in some of the commentaries I read that complain that how come Nebuchadnezzar gets so many challenges, but Belshazzar, I mean, he gets dispatched the night of his first seeming warning. Well, that question isn't quite accurate, because once Daniel is brought in and he's asked to speak, does he immediately go to the wall and start interpreting? No. He stands before Belshazzar and he gives him a history lesson. And he says, Belshazzar, please remember this, please remember that, please remember this. He recounts Nebuchadnezzar's experience, that he was given majesty, glory, and honor. But then he became full of himself. My kingdom, my glory. And what does God do to him? Verse 21, take a look at it. He ate grass like a cow. Nebuchadnezzar was drenched with the dew of heaven until he learned that the Most High God rules over the kingdoms of the world and appoints anyone he desires to rule over them. Now, Belshazzar's around at that time. This is his grandfather, is how we would understand him. His father, evil Merodach, is bewildered. What's happening to my dad? Where is he? We don't even know what he's doing. 7 years, he's gone. I mean, this didn't just pass by Belshazzar. He knew. And he also knew Nebuchadnezzar's testimony. But then the key to this is what Daniel says next. Look at verse 22. You are his successor, O Belshazzar. You know all this, and yet you have not humbled yourself. You have proudly defied the Lord of heaven. Remember how Daniel was sent to the mailroom? Neither Belshazzar nor his nobles wanted to listen to what Daniel had to say. They were not going to surrender to God. And yet, the idea that Belshazzar can claim ignorance, I didn't know. He did. He lived it. To say that God was not fair, Belshazzar was given plenty of opportunities to humble himself. He just refused to do it. You know what this reminds me of is the Apostle Paul. Let's jump over on the screen to Romans chapter 1. Through everything God made people can see clearly his invisible qualities, his eternal power, divine nature, so they have no excuse. Let me say that the evidence for God is all around us. The only way you can't see it is that you refuse to see it. And I know that may sound offensive, and I don't mean to be. This whole new atheism thing, it's kind of a rage, but what it is, it's a choice we make to rebel against the God who's clearly visible. You see him in creation. You sense him in this thing we call a conscience. What is it that makes us think about things we ought to do or things that we ought not to do? Does that kind of thinking come out of primordial slime? Where does it come from? It comes from the fact that we were made in the image of God. The psalmist put it this way, Psalm 14. Only fools say in their hearts there is no God. This is not an easy message to say because it sounds so harsh, but sometimes you've got to speak directly and say, Belshazzar was that fool. New atheists, are those fools because they're saying, I don't see it, so therefore it isn't. I don't like talking like this sometimes, and neither do you. But it's the truth. Daniel was called to confront Belshazzar. And he said, listen, Belshazzar, God will not be mocked. He's holy. Secondly, He's going to do what's right. And thirdly, he has the final say in everything. Now maybe Belshazzar knew Nebuchadnezzar's story about chapter 4, where he got 12 months before the hammer fell on his head. And Belshazzar's thinking, well, okay, I'm getting this warning, I'll get 12 months. That's not how it worked out, is it? Did you notice verse 30? Maggie read it very emphatically. That very night, Belshazzar, the Babylonian king, was killed. Let's put verse 5:30 on there. See, part of my role here this morning is to plead with you. If you're still here and keeping God at arm's length, maybe you're hoping that, there's a kind of story that runs in, at least in American culture, a guy named Grandpa Joe. Grandpa Joe was a pretty rotten guy all his life. Even his children didn't like him. But 5 days before he died, on his deathbed, he prayed a prayer, received Jesus, and now everything was okay, right? Well, technically, theologically, that would be the case. But the question is, did Uncle Joe really, or Grandpa Joe, get right with God? Did he surrender? Or was he just looking for a get-out-of-hell-free card? That's a hard one to call. Because please understand, there are only two things that we can say with absolute certainty in life. Two things. One, we all have an eternal soul. Okay, you want to throw that one on the screen? And second, we all have an appointment with the Most High God. Now, when will that appointment happen? I don't know. That's God's decision. He has the final say. But in the meantime, like this morning, he's giving you an opportunity. Like he did to Belshazzar, like he did to Nebuchadnezzar, like he does all the time. He's saying, listen. I've done all I can to help you become right with me. But you have got to choose to surrender to him, ask for forgiveness that comes through the Lord Jesus Christ and his death and resurrection, and then allow him to be Lord and Master of your life. That's the decision. That's the choice that needs to be made. Now, the only reason I would allow you to delay is if you could guarantee me that you're even going to make it to bed tonight. Can you guarantee me that? No. So I plead with you. Don't delay. God has the final say. We don't know when your last day is. I just plead you come to a relationship with him because he is life and breath itself. For the rest of us, okay? Those of us who have already come to that relationship with Jesus Christ, which I believe is most people here, we have been marginalized by our culture. I get that. They don't want to hear the message I just delivered. Now some of their reticence is our fault because we can be a fairly judgmental group of people at times, can't we? But even if we're at our most gracious, they'll still reject our message sometimes. See, what's going on is precisely what Paul said in the book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 18. The message of the cross is foolish to those who are headed for destruction. When we preach that Christ was crucified, the Jews are offended. The Gentiles say it's all nonsense. But to those called by God to salvation, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. My guess is that when Daniel walked into that banquet hall, he probably didn't have a whole lot of hope that he was going to get through to Belshazzar, and apparently he didn't. What did Daniel do? He delivered the message anyway. Are all the people that you're going to bump into for the rest of your life going to listen to you and going to respond in a positive fashion to your presentation of the truth of the gospel? No, they won't. So what do? Like Daniel, you deliver it anyway. Because there are three things that people need to know. One is that God is holy. But he is also just and fair. But he has the final word. And so our hearts ache for those who don't yet know him. And so we plead with them. Consider it. Open your heart. And beyond that, even as we're in this hall, we pray for them. So let's pause and be quiet a minute. Bow your heads, close your eyes if you will, because I'm convinced that every one of us in here knows somebody in our family, our friendship group, our work, that, boy, talking to them is like talking to a stone. Well, their hearts are hardened. And we just need to pray, Lord, in this instance, would you in your mercy, you say in your word, you want all people to come to Christ. Lord, this one, this person I pray for. And just do that right now. Pray that God would make their hearts soft. Pray that God would give them a hunger to know him. So Lord, like Daniel, we know we are called to speak. We also know it may not be well received. We don't like to offend. We don't like to be rejected. But we're talking eternity here. So we are praying, and hear our prayers, for all the names that have gone up to the throne in this room just this morning. And in the coming weeks, months, open opportunities that we might share and see that you're at work in them, calling them to yourself. Yeah, we've got a message that says God's holy. It's not a bad thing, it's a great thing, it's a wonderful thing. That you are fair and just, that's a wonderful thing. But that you've got the final say, and we dare not push it. So thanks for this word. May we take it with us and allow you to speak through us, all for the sake and the name of Jesus. Amen.